practical way, I think they understand that they need to have peace, they need to have stability. I would think we should not underestimate China.
So, Michael, do you think that China doesn't really have the ambition to be, say, the political power of the world, but just really the economic power of the world, and will then enjoy the benefits that come from it?
No, I think there is from my many visits to China, there is a strong nationalism in China that, and I think it comes from a very long history that wants to be a truly powerful player on the world stage as well as having economic domination. I think that's a huge concern for the United States in terms of partnering with China. There are geopolitical issues that loom very large. For example, competition over resources. That's going to be huge as we go into the next few decades. Oil, and we've already seen it occur in the rare metals. So.
John, everyone's talking about, how Asia is getting ahead, but no one seems to be focusing enough on the one big problem that Asia is going to battle, which is inflation, and how that's creeping into wages and manufacturing. To what extent do you think that could derail the party?
I think it stands very little chance of derailing the party. I think that those elements will be able to be maintained in control as the growth comes through. I think that India in particular has proven its advantages well beyond pure price to its customers, around the world. And so I think that both India and China, clearly there will be an uptick in the economy and in the wages and in the underlying structures, and all of which is desirable. But I think that those countries and the organizations that operate within them will be able to control that, maintain that, and focus on efficiency, focus on innovation, focus on value-added services, that potentially can support the higher underlying, wage point.
Salad?
I agree. I don't think inflation is likely to derail the party. I think there are several approaches we'll put in place already in the Indian context. We're seeing an increase in interest rates. We'll have some effects in the macro economy. Equally, China's been doing that. There's some, which no one believes, some approach on currency as well, which is finally happening. So I think there will be inflation, but I don't think it'll derail the party. What I think could be, commenting on the earlier point, some critical issues, especially in India, is the level of corruption that we deal with. There are similar, and I've visited with, and we have some significant operations in China, an understanding of how that system works, while different from our system here. And we need to find ways to correct that, because that might send out messages, true or perception, false or perceptions, which change the behavior of the external world towards us. And we need to adapt quickly to drive that. So I don't think so much the inflation is an issue.
Right. Chris, I want to ask you about currency in particular. As all of these economies grow, pure economics suggests that you cannot keep the currency down. The currencies will appreciate. How much of a big problem is that going to be for firms like Infosys and other players in the industry who sort of have been looking at the pricing advantage for decades now?
See, any kind of price advantage is temporary, because as the economy develops, as the per capita income goes up, your costs are going to go up. There is no doubt, especially in a people's business. Salary costs only keep going up, and with the appreciating rupee, the costs will go up. So we have to look at how do we become smarter, how do we automate more, how do we add more value to our clients, how do we move up the value chain. And that's what the Indian IT industry is doing today, looking at value addition, looking at broad range of services, looking at larger programs and things like that.
So Kiran, do you think that within Asia you're going to see different tiers? For example, like a Singapore, which does now really high-end back-end, whereas in India probably does a little less of that, but smaller countries like Vietnam are happy to do much lower back-end work. So do you think there's going to be a tiering that's going to be distinct and emerge?
Well, it's certainly going to be there. I would hesitate to use the word tiering, which has a sort of vertical thing. What's going to happen is work's going to go where there's talent. And the talent is going to be specialized. I mean, even today's world, very, put in sort of shorthand terms, if you want great design, you go to Scandinavia. If you want great mathematicians, you go to Hungary or to Tamil Nadu or Bengal, probably, and that's going to be the trend. And countries will want to specialize, just as companies do, in creating certain talent pools. And there will be some countries, just as there are companies today, especially in the IT space, that span a wider spectrum. And countries like China, India, and the US, because of the sheer size of their population and their capabilities, will be wide spectrum. Countries like Singapore will have to necessarily specialize in a niche if they want to survive. So that's certainly going to happen, and the interdependency is going to increase. And the critical point is that the sooner we all recognize that interdependency, the better. If we get into a protectionist mode, either with regard to trade or immigration, we're going to have problems. And as trade has opened up, the world of the future is necessarily going to see immigration opening up. And again, to go back to my earlier point, that's my hesitation about China. Countries that put walls on immigration, not just on trade, are going to suffer, as the Japanese are suffering. To me, the Japanese are having a problem, not so much because of demographics and aging population or because they're inefficient, as because there have been closed walls on immigration. They never allowed immigrants in, and that's creating problems for them. And China, if it goes the same way, is going to end up the same way 60 years from now. The Chinese miracle will become like the Japanese miracle of the 80s.
Michael, before we wrap the show, to you, 3 big predictions of the future of the next decade, since you're the futurist on the show.
Okay, let's see. The first one will be that climate change becomes a bigger and bigger issue as we go into the rest of this decade. We're going to begin to see more and more weather disaster events that will, even in developing countries, make people realize that the opportunity for sustainability is not only a good business, but crucial to life. I think the second is we're going to see some emerging surprise powers, surprise players who really have much more power than we suspect. And I'm thinking of countries like Brazil or Turkey that we don't normally think of, but have a middle class that's really evolving quickly. And then the third one is, by the end of this decade, we will be surprised, I think, by how widespread wireless broadband is worldwide and how important telepresence becomes. In other words, the notion of outsourcing or insourcing is going to become very fluid because, in a sense, we are all going to live next door in a virtual world.
Well, the world, it seems, is going to get flatter and flatter as we speak. That's all we have time for on this special roundtable. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us, and it's a wrap on the show.